that tendering process ever benefited from that particular process. All the 17 companies, none of them benefited, and that as a result or as a consequence of the failure to proceed to the next levels, the country did not lose even a single cent. A question was put to me why I am looking at the submissions by various parties and not going to the observations and the recommendations by the Senate. And just like a skillful legal surgeon, I have been able to point out various findings, submissions. For example, the submissions finding themselves at page 222, paragraph 107 and 106, 107 and 109 find themselves at the recommendation, at the observation of the Senate at page 271. So there is serious correlation between my findings as submitted by various parties who appeared before the Senate and the observations made by the Senate. So I dealt largely on what the Senate found as opposed to what the Senate had during the proceedings. Number two, Mr. Speaker, sir, clarification was sought as to why the bid failed, and although that will be dealt with at length, permit me to draw the attention of the Assembly to page 108 of the volume 3 of the Deputy President's Body of Documents. You'll find a letter from KEMSA dated the 5th May 2023, being a notification to Shobika Impex Private Limited. And it reads, the reference is made to the above tender and advised that the tender was unsuccessful due to the following reasons. 1, tender security was not paginated. Number 2, please plan to collect your bid security from the procurement office immediately. It may be of interest to note the date when this letter is being generated is the 5th of May. It also be of interest to note when the alleged bullying and intimidation occurred. This letter precedes the alleged bullying, alleged intimidation. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, sir, this letter is voluntarily being issued and being generated by KEMSA themselves at their own intuition, as opposed to being triggered by any external officer, in this case, the person of the Deputy President. In their own volition, KEMSA triggers and invites Shobika to come and collect their bids, and on witness, Mr. Speaker, sir, the witness confirmed that this is always the end of a failed bid. Finally, Mr. Speaker, sir, permit me to draw the attention of the Assembly to the matter in issue. That is at page 36 of the volume 1 of the impeachment motion. The matter in issue that is subject for interrogation, Mr. Speaker,
45 seconds.
As I pen off, is not whether the tenders were responsive, whether the country lost any money, whether investigations were done, whether there was conflict of interest, whether there were gifts that accrued therefrom. The question in issue is, did the person of the Deputy President bully the officer? Was there evidence? So let us not lose ground or focus on the ground on the matter in issue, so that we focus and we put the train on rail. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Counsel for the National Assembly, take us to the rise of the House.
Mr. Speaker, sir, how many minutes? 10?
You have 9 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I am here to respond on behalf of the National Assembly on only 2 questions. Mr. Speaker, sir, Listening to the Deputy President's side, I believe they have misunderstood the nature and context of ground number 11. And there was a question by the Senator whether we have substantiated ground number 11 on bullying of KEMSA officials. Secondly, there was a question also on whether there was loss of public funds in this tendering process. Mr. Speaker, sir, allow me to answer the first question by mentioning that the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya is a high-ranking state official. The Republic of Kenya, the polity of the Republic of Kenya is based on certain fundamental national values and principles of governance. In addition, there are provisions on leadership and integrity. If you look at the provisions of Article 75, starting with 73, then you conclude with 75. There is an express prohibition on conflict of interest when it comes to all state offices. Now, to contextualize that question, you have to look at the purpose of impeachment. The Deputy President, being a high-ranking state officer, means that there is a constitutional process for bringing him into account to question his conduct. And that is why you have this process of impeachment. Impeachment is about political responsibility. It's about governance. Impeachment is not about criminal culpability. It's not about gathering evidence for purpose of taking him to court. It's about bringing him to account on what he has done from a political standpoint, and that issue of the distinction of criminal processes from impeachment has been clarified by the Supreme Court of Kenya. The Supreme Court of Kenya, in the case of Mike Sonko, was expressed clear and unequivocal that impeachment is about those values, ethos in Article 10 and the provisions of leadership and integrity in Chapter 6. Now, if you look at the way ground number 11 has been coached, ground number 11, Mr. Speaker, sir, ground number 11 talks about gross misconduct. Now, the Supreme Court of Kenya has interpreted what amounts to gross violation, which in context then means gross misconduct. And the conclusion is that when you violate these core values in Article 10 and the provisions of leadership and integrity, then you are guilty of gross misconduct. You are guilty also of gross violation of the Constitution. Sometimes you are guilty of abuse of office. So to put it in context, if you look at that charge that we have put in ground number 11, it talks about bullying of KEMSA officials. Now, that fact of bullying, and we have been more specific. If you look at the charge, we have mentioned the specific clause of legislation where the act of bullying has been prohibited. And this provision, if you look at the provisions of the Leadership and Integrity Act, the provisions of the Leadership and Integrity Act specifically prohibit bullying by state officials. And in that context, then you can see that in terms of the allegation that we are making and the evidence which has been submitted before this House, especially that call which was made by the Deputy President. The call was made by the Deputy President to a KEMSA official. Why would the Deputy President be pushing the interests of a commercial interests of a private company? That is crystal clear when you look at his own admission in his response to this allegation. The Deputy President has admitted that he lent the sum of Kenya shillings 200 million to Crystal Company to acquire some hotel in Nyeri. This is the same company which the Deputy President is making a call to KEMSA to consider. And a senior council official, in this case the managing director, goes to EACC in a tender process.
Mr. Speaker, I was just wondering which clarification my learned colleague is responding to, because the time for submission is in the evening.
Yes, Council from the National Assembly.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, so I'm just concluding that it's an impeachable offense to make the link.
Very well. Now conclude.
Yes, so, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you look at then the evidence which has been submitted by Dr. Mulwa, that he received a call from the Deputy President, who is a high-ranking state official, to go to EACC, and then he went to EACC to collect evidence, which EACC had gathered for purposes of submitting that tender to the Deputy President or his contact, in this case, his son. Then what we are saying is that that act by the Deputy President then constitutes a violation of the provisions of the Leadership and Integrity Act, specifically Section 34 of the Leadership and Integrity Act, and that amounts to bullying. And to that extent, we are submitting that charge has indeed been substantiated in all its four corners. On the second question, and here again, it appears there is a misnomer. To prove an economic crime, you don't need to prove that there was loss of funds. An economic crime in this case occurs when a sitting Deputy President, in a tendering process, he makes a call, which the recipient then interprets in a different way, perhaps to influence the tendering process, or perhaps